Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd, please go ahead. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses for coming here and sharing your unique perspectives. I'm going to start with a question for the Doctors for the Protection from Guns. I found it interesting, and my own research backed up your claim that 75 to 80% of firearms-related deaths in Canada are caused by suicide. And I note that the department in the last meeting justified C-21 because of its ability to reduce suicide by firearms. I'm concerned, though, if you're aware of a 2004 peer-reviewed study from Jean Caron, which showed that while gun control measures did reduce the prevalence of firearm-related suicide, it didn't reduce the overall suicide rate as people found alternative means of committing suicide. I think we should be promoting policies that reduce suicide overall. We know we're in a mental health challenge, but it seems like this policy, it might have an impact on reducing firearms-related suicides, but do you have any evidence to suggest that it would reduce suicides? Absolutely.
Thank you for the question. There is actually strong evidence, and I'll defer to my colleague, Dr. Madry, who is a mental health expert and knows this literature quite well.
Perhaps because of my limited time, can you please submit that evidence to committee for our review when we have more time? But thank you.
We would be delighted to submit, but we would also request that we be allowed to answer the question. 2 sentences, please. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
We will submit. I think in summary, the mental health community is unanimously in favor of means restriction, which has been put in place for many different, in many different areas to prevent suicide, including on things like bridges. Very few, a minority of people actually substitute. And when they do, they typically substitute to suicide attempts with less lethal means. So I'll leave it at that, and we will.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll expect some more stuff. I was also interested in a Statistics Canada report from 2020 that said 4 out of 5 victims of violent crime, 83% of victims of violent crime, where a firearm was present were either not injured, 61% of them not injured, or they sustained a minor injury that required no professional medical treatment or only some first aid. It says that victims, and this is from Statistics Canada, victims of firearm-related violent crime were less likely to be injured than victims where no firearm was present. How does that match up with the evidence that you have presented here today? This is Statistics Canada.
I'm not aware of that specific data, but I can tell you that a recent CMAG study published by an first author named David Gomez cited a 42% mortality rate for patients who arrive to hospital. So I don't know that specific data. That's not peer-reviewed data. I'm not familiar with that data. I'd have to study that and get back to you on that. But that is not what the body of evidence shows, and that is not what we're seeing in our trauma rooms, our emergency departments, and hospitals on a daily basis.
Thank you. Moving on to my next question to the CSAAA. I noted that in the last meeting, I was asking about the 5-round magazine limit. And I'm aware that there are a number of primarily non-restricted rifles in Canada that can be substituted using a handgun magazine that can hold 10 rounds. Do you have any evidence that these firearms have been used or have been any inherent fact that these firearms have 10 rounds? Have they been used in crimes? Is this something that's a concern?
Absolutely not. There's been no direct correlation of data with those particular firearms that have the ability to have a higher capacity due to the pistol magazine exemption of the 5-round limit in semi-automatic firearms. There's been no evidence that those firearms have been used in crimes or there's been an increase in public safety concerns.
Yeah, and to clarify, nobody's suggesting that we should be legalizing high-capacity magazines in Canada, but for the case of these firearms in particular that could be impacted by this legislation, you haven't seen any, crimes. There hasn't been a public safety argument as far as you've seen that these are being used in crimes because of their capacity.
Correct. Yes, we've seen no data to suggest that there's an increase in public safety concerns.
One concern I had, there was a provision in the bill that said forcing people to show their license to prevent trafficking. For example, it said straw purchasing. I've always kind of thought straw purchasing for handguns or restricted weapons was a bit of a red herring, considering that they're registered. So anyone who would straw purchase a restricted firearm and then sell it on the black market would be really opening themselves up, because it would be quite easy to identify who is committing this. Can you maybe talk about straw purchasing? Like, is it a serious issue?
Straw purchasing represents a very small amount of guns that end up in the hands of criminals. It is still something that is on the radar, and the industry has worked a lot with NWest to identify straw purchasers. We've had a 3-year program now that has been extremely successful in lowering these amounts of straw purchasing.
Did you receive government support for this program, or was this something industry took on itself?
This is something that industry took on all on its own. We received no government support and no government direction.
Would government support help you to make that program stronger, you think?
Absolutely. We've requested it and we have not received it, but we would definitely help out.
Yeah, like in your case, can you, in my last few seconds, can you give examples of what kind of straw purchasing you've seen?
Yes, there's been a couple of examples where individuals have purchased handguns in volume from different retailers, therefore making it hard for the retailers to identify. However, every one of those transactions was approved by the Chief Firearms Office and the RCMP, and it seemed more concerning to us, and that's why we took it on as an industry to look into it. We could not understand how the Chief Firearms Office and the RCMP were not able to identify this before they approved the transactions.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off there. Thank you.